I'm very excited to meet young people, especially women, out in the wilderness on the barren lands or in northern Ontario from these camps like Keewaydin, where David has guided trips and our next two speakers have been paddling with. But not so excited having a helicopter flying over my head in the middle of nowhere. So for that reason, I'm also glad that we have young women here who are getting out in the wilderness and seeing what it's like, that can advocate for our land, because it's pretty much the canoeists and the native people who are on the other side of the business, mining and oil. So I feel personally this is really, really important, as well as to see the confidence that these women have, young women. Their leaders are in their early 20s and they are under 20, so I think that's just fantastic. Our speakers are Amelia Ingersoll and Kera Zegar. Amelia is 16, she's from Vermont, and Kera is just graduated from University of San Francisco, she's 19. And they're going to share with you lessons learned in northern Quebec.
Is this on? My name is Amelia Ingersoll.
I'm Kera Zegar. Hi.
So we spent this past summer in northern Quebec doing a 7-week canoe trip in the area of Lac des Oeufs. This is a map of some of the places we've traveled. We did our trip with Keewaydin, which is a canoe camp established in 1893. Girls were able to start doing their canoe trips in 1999, so we were the 7th girls' trip to go 7 weeks to ending at the Hudson Bay. So 2 summers ago, we did a trip down the East Main River, right here, and we crossed Lake Mistassini. And this summer, we put in at Lac des Oeufs and traveled on the Kanapskou River, the Great Whale River, the Coates River, and the Guerin River up here in this area, and then finally paddled up the Richmond Gulf to Amoyak.
Okay, so technically we spent our first day in tents. It was really rainy, super cold, really stormy, classic Quebec weather, so we took a weather day our first day. And the first day that really felt like our trip had begun was about 6 days in. We had a full day. You know, it started to feel like we were getting into the swing of things, and you know, we'd had moderately long portages, a good paddle, and by the end, we were ready to, you know, settle in and really start our trip. So at the end of the day, we took our dessert up this hill, and we took in the first of many beautiful views, and we talked about our goals for the summer, carrying on the tradition, setting a good example for the younger girls, and we really we wanted to live in the moment and make sure that we were embracing the lessons that living in the wilderness can teach you. So our staff, Tans, she read us a letter that Ann Curie had written to her younger self, and it was about embracing your differences and being confident in who you are. And that really resonated with our group because we come from all over the United States, and even though we're all really different, we come together in the summer and we make a strong section, and we wanted to make it to the bay and have the best summer we could.
Yes, this is at the top of the mountain that we hiked up. A little walk. So Keewaydin is pretty unique. I'm sure many of you have experienced wildlife, but this summer we had the opportunity to have lunch with a bear. He joined us for breakfast that morning, and we had to scare him off by singing Old MacDonald. It was a little scary, but pretty cool to be able to experience that. It's not something, and we were luckily had an amazing photographer on our trip to capture this image. But another unique thing about Quebec is that although there's new different kinds of canoes, fiberglass, whatever, we continued to use wood canvas boats and trunk lines and duffels, as you can see here. I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar. But yeah, so that's a pretty interesting part of Quebec, and because of that, it's not that portaging is harder, it's just the boats are heavy, and so yeah, so when we got to, but the middle section of our trip was more leisurely. We had many rest days, but at the end, the final about 10 days, we had a pretty challenging time on the Guerin River and the time leading up to the Guerin River. We did some lake hopping, so it was straight up the mountain and straight down the mountain to get to this Guerin River, which greeted us with shallow water and rocks, so we spent a good amount of time just walking down this river until we ended up portaging on the mountain. So here we are on the ridge, portaging on this mountain. This particular day we didn't take a single paddle stroke. We had to walk along this ridge all day long, and it was a hot day. And we were going up down these mountains. It was very challenging, but because of what we had spent our time at Quebec, we learned to appreciate what was around us. So even though the river was greeting us with some steep portages and rocky water, we were able to appreciate this amazing landscape and the beauty of this river that we were traveling down, which was a river that only 2 other Quebec sections had gone down, and we were the second girls section to do this.
As Amelia said, we had been walking all day, just portaging the Guerin, and at the end of the day, when we finished our 1,500-meter portage, we waded a little bit down the river and pulled over at the next portage, and we decided to camp on the beginning. And so our staff went and scouted the other end of the portage, and it promptly started to rain. Even though it was really nice earlier that day. So, we were all ready to get dinner started and kind of just settle in for the night. But Tans, our staff, came back, and, we were asking her about the portage. How long was it? What was the footing like? Stuff like that. And, she just laughed. And this was a little disgruntling, I guess. She's usually pretty straightforward when she talks about portages, so we were all kind of nervous, why is she laughing? Despite that, a few of us, including Amelia and I, volunteered to carry the boats over to the other side to get a head start for the next morning. And this portage ended up being about 800 meters, and it was the most eventful portage of the summer. First of all, I was, I think, second or third to last, and the 2 girls behind me didn't see in the whole portage, didn't know where they were. I was kind of yelling behind me, trying to figure out where they were, but no one responded. And then the girl in front of me, her bow and her stern line kept coming out. And this poor girl, Devin, she volunteered to walk with us. And her only help would be this stick that we called the Gandalf stick. And she would walk around trying to help us, and we would all yell, Devin, Devin, come help. And the girl in front of me, her stern line came out, and it was too late, but I noticed that the rope was wrapped around my ankle. And I was standing at the top of a hill, and I just did this really epic fall. My ankle fell out from underneath me. I fell straight on my back, the canoe right on top of me. I just was dragged down this hill. Poor Jessie was crawling on her hands and knees with the boat still on her head, not knowing what happened. And we're both just yelling, Devin, Devin, come help, please. And, probably somewhere else, someone's also yelling, Devin, Devin, because we're all just all over the place on this portage. And eventually, we get back up and keep going on this portage, and that's when we come across a bog. And this bog has a little mossy part where you could walk, but most of it is just muck. And I see a lone canoe, or what looks like a lone canoe, but well, really, it was Amelia's canoe, and all I could see were her little legs kicking underneath, trying to get up, but she was knee-deep, completely stuck on her back in this bog, and all Jesse and I could do was just walk by her like, sorry, bud, but we gotta keep going. And, you know, Devin's probably trying to find the other two girls who are lost somewhere, and eventually, we all make it to the other side. You know, our staff's on the other side. She flipped down, probably super easy for her, but we were all like, it was super hectic, and, you know, we all came out at different times from different places, and, you know, once we all flipped down, we were all kind of just looking at each other, and now understanding why Tans was laughing, and it could have gone two ways, I think. We could have been really angry and really annoyed that it was such a tough portage, and we had already been portaging all day long, and it was just such a long day, but we all just started to laugh, and I think that really says something about our section because, you know, we don't take anything too seriously, and we can look back at that terrible, weird experience and just, like, have fun with it.
Yeah. So the next day after that dreadful portage, we had another portage that was 1,200 meters long that took most of the day. It was very tiring. We didn't have great weather that day, but after this portage, we were able to finally take a few strokes on the Guerin River, which was pretty exciting, and it was very fun. The water was high enough so we could go down the rest of this next section of the river. But the staff had been telling us this whole trip that we would be coming across a waterfall soon that was described as Amazonian. So we were all pretty excited that because we'd never seen anything Amazonian before, so that would be cool. So we were paddling down this river, and then we'd slowed down because the staff had said, "Oh, we're probably getting close to this portage or to the campsite." So we get to this point, and although it looks like it could be a lake or something, that's a drop off. We kind of came across this suddenly, and we're very startled by this drop-off. So we had to back paddle and make our way to try and continue finding this campsite further back down the river. So eventually we found the broken alders marking where we would find our campsite, and we were greeted by probably the worst unloading we had ever faced that trip. It was complete mud. We had to unload the boat's fire lining, our stuff, into these tight trees, finding room for our canoes, and then we had to hike probably 300 meters up a hill to our campsite. It was pretty unpleasant and challenging, and we also had to carry pots of water up the hill. Our hands got all blistered from carrying these bales of water up to the campsite, but luckily we were able to have a rest day on the top of this mountain.
So as Amelia said, we were pretty tired, and we had a pretty lots of consecutive days where we were just portaging all day long, and so we were really looking forward to having this rest day, right? So the next morning we slept in, and then after a few campsite chores like wood crew, and we made breakfast and I think lunch, and it was at that point we decided that we wanted to portage the boats from the top to the bottom of the waterfall, just, you know, to get a head start on the next day. And I mean, you don't have to rest the whole day on a rest day. So this portage was pretty steep. I mean, it wasn't the steepest that we had encountered, but it was kind of just like these mossy ledges that we kind of had to step down, and there was lots of trees, so you had to kind of ping-pong your way through, and if your bow got on the wrong side of the tree, you had to like go back up and back down, and it was really tough. But, you know, once we got to the bottom and we took a quick swim, we were all ready to see this waterfall. So I wrote something in my journal about the waterfall, and I think that I'm going to share it with you guys right now. So it was phenomenal, absolutely incredible. The waterfall was ginormous, so powerful and loud. The water shattered as it went over the side into a million little droplets. It dropped lower and lower in frayed ropes until it crashed back onto the river, much of it swirling and dispersing in the air. To the left, the rock was layered in such a way that it looked like steps, and the water on the rocks glistened in the sun like sequins. I would have done this whole trip just to see this waterfall. So that's the waterfall. It was pretty amazing, and as you can see, it's really big. And I think that especially the last point that I made in my journal was that it was significant because I feel like we get caught up in the process of tripping, you know, like portaging and paddling and, you know, just getting into your rhythm. But there's some amazing things out there that we get to see that only a handful of people have ever seen. And so I think that me saying that I would have done that whole trip just to see that one thing was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, so the next day we finished our time on the Guerin River and arrived at Guerin Lake. The Guerin River was pretty small, so this lake seemed huge. we were greeted by the first caribou we saw and the only caribou we saw all summer, which was pretty exciting. We were at a big lake and greeted by this cute caribou. So we paddled up Guerin Lake to the 300-meter section between the Richmond Gulf and Guerin Lake. So as we paddled up and we unloaded our boats and quickly ran up to the top of this mountain, and this is Guerin Lake behind. So behind us we could see Guerin Lake, the once massive lake, and then in front of us was the Richmond Gulf, which was pretty amazing because this was a climax of our trip. I think we were pretty excited. Many of us thought of this as our final destination, even though we still had 5 days to paddle up it. It was beautiful. We were so excited to arrive at this amazing body of water. And we'd never canoe tripped, although and many of us have been canoe tripping for years. We had none of us had ever done anything on salt water, or somewhat salt water, and so we were pretty excited to get there. But unfortunately, we had to wait one more day to paddle up this because we had horrible weather the next day. But we were able to portage, and yeah.
So after we took a weather day, we had our last portage as campers. So this is, as Amelia said before, this is our last trip as campers, and so like this was our very last portage we would take as campers. And the portages we had taken before on this trip, I think, had prepared us for something. Like on this portage, I was ready to take a beating. Like I was ready for it to be super steep, like people, like something throwing rocks at me or something, like dodging stuff. Like I was just ready for anything. But you know, this portage, it was like strolling through like an air-conditioned tube. Yeah, it was the foliage, the alders that are usually pretty pesky and annoying to push through. They had formed this like arch over us, so it was like a tube of foliage, and the decline was pretty steady, and the rocks weren't even slippery, and it wasn't even warm. So I was just like, what had I been like working towards this entire summer? Like this was super easy. So yeah, I zoomed right through, maybe like 15 minutes or something. I don't know. And you know, on the other end, it was almost like I wasn't disappointed, but it was definitely not a story I'd look back and like tell my grandchildren about or something. But I think that what it represented was really significant because it was our last portage, and even though it wasn't like an epic story, it was important in what it represented, and I can look back on it and smile about it.
Okay, so we finally were able to cross the Richmond Gulf, or not cross it, go up it, and that was a pretty, I would say it could have been more eventful, but we had our fair share of weather. We experienced brutal wind, and then rain, very, very cold. We had to take another weather day on this after making a big crossing that was probably 1 kilometer and took us a very long time. It was pretty scary, but fortunately we were able to take the time to get the Richmond Gulf to paddle it when it was like glass. So we had that opportunity to paddle across it, and although it doesn't quite look like glass in this, it felt like glass compared to the brutal winds we had experienced the day before. And so this was kind of our big finish of our Q8 careers as campers, and it was pretty exciting to arrive in Amoyak at the end of our trip. And yes.
So People say that once you reach the top, it always gets easier on the way down. And as you might have picked up on what we were saying earlier, that's not the case at Keewaydin. So despite that, it can't rain forever, and the portage has to end sometime, and at the end of the night, you'll be all snuggled up in your sleeping bag, not regretting a single thing. And it may be cheesy, but no matter what, your section mates will always be going through the worst of it right with you, and by the end of it, when it's all over, you're going to want to go through and do it all over again. And the unbelievable things that we see out there, whether it be a bear walking through your campsite at breakfast or the most colorful, stunning sunset you've ever seen, are what make it all worth it. And in the beginning, we were all so focused on making it to the bay, and by the end, we realized that the summer, like everything else, has to end too, and it's each amazing moment that we need to make the most of. Thank you.